2, 3, 4. No, I'm not learning to count. It's episode 234 of the Property Podcast. Welcome, everybody. I'm Rob B with Rob D. And this week, we're not looking at low yields. We're not looking at medium yields. We're not even looking at they're quite nice yields. We're looking at high yields.
I wonder what you were doing for a minute there, Rob. You threw me. Yeah, welcome to the Property Podcast. I'm Rob D. He is Rob B. We are indeed talking about high yields. Capital growth is very nice, but money in your pocket can't be beat. So if you are looking for high yields, we are going to give you some tips for how you can get there. We've also got a resource and a news story, as always. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. First thing to say, Rob, is we're bringing back something extremely popular that we've done in the past, but haven't done for a little while.
No, we haven't. But you're right, extremely popular. It's our listener deals episode. So if you're a new listener, you're probably thinking, what is that? So I better explain. Listener deals is where you send in details of deals and we review them on the podcast. It's as simple as that. So if you'd like your deal to be reviewed by us on the Property Podcast, we'll fill in this form. Super simple. Go to thepropertyhub.net/your deals. That's thepropertyhub.net/your deals. All one word. And then fill out a basic form, tell us a little bit about your deal, and you may be hearing it reviewed on the podcast, and we can give you direct advice. But you win, obviously, but so do thousands and thousands of other listeners. So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming up in the next few weeks. We're really looking forward to doing it.
Yeah, we love doing those. Something else we love is getting along to meetups. Sadly, tonight, neither of us can. I'm overseas and Rob is travelling within the UK, but not near a meetup, shockingly, given that there are so many. But just because we're missing out doesn't mean that you have to. We have got meetups all over the country tonight. Hopefully, you've already got your ticket booked and you've made your plans and you're heading down there to have a good time with other investors. But if you are listening to this bright and early on the Thursday, it's not too late if it's slipped your mind. Just go over to thepropertyhub.net/meetups, find your nearest, book your free ticket, go along, enjoy. Easy as that.
And maybe that's what the person in this week's news story should have done, Rob, and had their maybe deal reviewed by us on the podcast, or attended a meetup and spoke to a few people before ploughing in, getting their first buy-to-let, sort of, but it didn't go so well for them.
Yeah, this is a bit of a silly one. It's from the Mirror, but it's got a sensible point to it. The headline is, Bargain Hunter snaps up unique opportunity £7,000 flat at auction, but then finds out it's due to be demolished. Oh dear. So basically the headline gives it away rather. Craig Gibson, 48, spotted this property, costs £7,000 in Port Glasgow. He thought this looked like a pretty good deal. He saw the photos online, didn't look too bad. Then once he'd gone through with the purchase, it turned out that there was a demolition order on the property. Basically the whole street has been compulsory purchased and is going to be knocked down. Also, it shows in this article the photo in the auction catalogue, which looks pretty good, and a photo that he took when he went there, which shows everything completely boarded up, windows smashed, the works. Listen in here. Firstly, if a flat is on sale for £7,000, chances are there's something wrong with it. And second lesson, if you're buying at auction, look at the legal pack first and ideally go and see it first as well to make sure that it's there, it's not all boarded up, there aren't wrecking balls hanging ominously overhead. If you do those things, and as Rob said, educate yourself by getting along to a meetup or listening to the podcast, you should avoid the fate of poor Craig Gibson. But go and check out the story because the photos are quite funny. If you're not him.
Yeah, if you're not him. Thought he was getting a smashing deal. Never mind.
Oh.
Right, a bit better than our juicy jokes is our topic of the week. And this week we're looking at high yields, Rob. So sometimes you just need cash in the bank quickly. And as we know with property, there's all different approaches you can take. So this week we're looking at how to get a high yield, how to get money in the bank now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we like single lets. Single lets are solid, they're easy, they give you reasonable yields, and by the time you factor in the growth over the long term, you'll get to a good place in the end. But there's nothing wrong with wanting a bit more. So maybe your strategy requires that you produce an income now. For example, you want to get out of a job, you want to do that quickly. In that case, being in a good place in 20 years' time doesn't really help you. You want to get there now. If that's the case, you need to be looking for an alternative. Or maybe you just want higher returns than are on offer from single lets. Nothing wrong with being a little bit greedy. We, for the most part, are pretty boring. We stick to the single lets, but even we are still tempted sometimes.
Oh yes, we are boring.
We are, but we like to live vicariously through other people to escape some of our boringness. And we like to look at some of these strategies sometimes. So what we've done today is we've come up with 4 different investment models that could double the returns that you get from a single let. So let's have a run through, see what they're all about and how they stack up compared to each other.
Okay, so first on our list, it's HMOs. HMOs, for those who don't know, is houses of multiple occupancy. So just basically a residence with multiple people living in there. So the most typical route that most people go down when looking for yield is a HMO. It's the one that probably, if we asked podcast listeners to list a strategy, they'd probably go with HMOs first. And it's easy to see why. You could replace an average income with as few as 4 self-managed HMOs, which is attractive to many, many people. It could be the path to get out of work if that's what you want to do, if that's what you're motivated to do. So the pros of this strategy is it's a well-trodden path and predictable. Many people have gone down this path. You can follow in their footsteps. And if you do it right, I'm not saying it's easy, but if you do your numbers right, get the location right, get your systems and processes right, then if you do all these things, then you could achieve what some people would call financial freedom. You can replace your income completely through property. Now, of course, you've got to buy them. People won't give you HMOs for free, but it's a faster way of getting there if you want to do it. So why isn't everyone doing this? Well, there are cons, there are downsides to this as well. In some areas, there is oversupply. And this means that the model that was once attractive in these areas is no longer attractive, and the yields are depleting. And that links really to the biggest point, and probably the reason Rob and I don't do it, is the management. If you are going to self-manage HMOs, well, you are trading your time for a higher yield. So if you can get, for example, a 15 to 17% return on investment in a HMO versus maybe 7 to 8% in a single let, you think, oh, no brainer, I'll do the HMO. But you will pay for it in terms of time and effort managing that property. There is expense to that yield. You are paying for it in your own time. And for some people, they may find managing HMOs and managing multiple people in those properties stressful and difficult. It's not for everyone. Now, you can get your property managed, but then that takes down your yield. And then the difference between a single let and a HMO isn't vast. So really, the people who seem to do the best from HMOs are the ones who self-manage. I'm not saying it's impossible the other way. I'm not at all. But the best returns come from self-managing. And then finally, and this is actually what stops a lot of people getting into the HMO market, is the finance. It's actually really difficult to get finance on HMOs, it's particularly if you don't have a track record. Again, not impossible. There are ways and means, but it's not as competitive as your normal high street lending for a buy-to-let. And therefore, you have to factor that into your returns as well. So I think it's important high yields, yes, fantastic. But what do they cost? We're looking at that. But for some people, and this is the whole point of this episode, it's worth that cost, because some people listening to this may blooming hate their job. And if you hate your job and you feel the way to happiness is leaving that job, and the only way to do that is to produce an income, well then you may find managing people in a HMO far more enjoyable than your job. Don't get romantic though. Some people think being a landlord is a wonderful thing to do, and it can be, but it's not for everyone. But once you know yourself, if you think this one sounds for you, crack on, because you could get to financial freedom sooner than you think.
Yeah, exactly. The HMO model is appealing because it's simple. And simple and easy are not the same thing, but it is simple. You can see how you can get there in a quite straightforward way, and I think that's why it appeals. Another thing that appeals to a lot of people is holiday lets. What actually sparked the idea for this episode is that we've seen lots of emails and things on forums and things like that with people saying, I want to get a high income. Should I go for HMOs or holiday lets? They're the two that seem to come up the most often. They're the most common. We've got another couple for you as well. But these are sort of the two that come to mind first of all. So let's first of all clarify what we mean by a holiday let. So this can be anything where you rent a property out short term. So it could be your typical coastal holiday villa or something like that, or it could be something in more of a city centre location for business travellers. Either way, it doesn't really matter. The model is the same. You're renting a property out for days at a time or weeks at a time rather than months or years. Now, when we were talking about HMOs, we saw how the gross yield looks very attractive, and then that's taken down by various factors, including management, and you have to work out what you end up with as a net yield. With holiday lets, that's even more pronounced. The gross yield on a holiday let will look extremely high. So if you just work out what your nightly rate could be, you multiply that by 365, and then you put that next to the purchase price, it's going to look enormous. But of course, you're never going to rent the property out every single day of the year with no costs. So you need to accurately measure your occupancy rate and your costs to get to what that true net yield will be. And that puts you in a position to compare holiday lets to other strategies that you could go for. So what are the advantages of holiday lets compared to other investments that you could go for in search of high yield? Well, one is that it's quite fun. Just looking at the research process can be quite enjoyable. Some people have the idea that they could stay there sometimes as well, although of course if you're staying there, that's going to be a time when you're not getting paid, so you have to factor that in as well. Also, you don't have any of the normal tenant worries. So you don't have to worry about tenants not paying because they normally pay you in advance. You don't have to worry about potentially evicting them and all that kind of thing because they'll just leave when their holiday is over. So in that regard, it's more straightforward. Another advantage is that the tax treatment can be better than it is for other types of property. So you need to check all the details, but if something meets the criteria for being a furnished holiday let, then you avoid the whole Section 24 business and you get other allowances as well. So there are upsides, but of course, there are downsides as well. And again, this is something that we saw with HMOs, but it's even more pronounced with holiday lets. It's the time-consuming nature of marketing and managing the property. Like with an HMO, you can have people in multiple rooms coming and going at all times. With holiday lets, you could have new people to check in every few days. You've also got to be on top of your marketing to make sure that the property is full, and that can take up a lot of time as well. You don't have to do those things yourself, but if you don't, then you have to factor the costs of that into your figures. If you're paying an agency, that can be quite a chunky amount that you have to allow for. And the other kind of complication, I think, is trying to figure out in advance exactly what return you're going to get, because the real key is your occupancy levels. So you can have a pretty decent guess as to what your costs are going to be. But when it comes to, is it going to be full 50% of the time, 70%, 80%? It's very difficult to know. You can look around at competing properties, you can talk to other people and try and get a feel for it, but it's very difficult. You're never going to be able to get that occupancy exactly right. So you're going to end up with a kind of range of what your yield could end up being, but you won't know the exact figure. So all in all, quite similar to the considerations we were talking about for HMOs. It's more time consuming if you do it yourself. You can get other people to help you with that, but that reduces your return. The return will still be higher than a single let. You just have to consider whether all the other characteristics of it appeal to you or not.
This is a personal opinion, so this is not advice to say this is what everyone should do. But of the two strategies, holiday lets is the one that appeals to me most. And I think that's because you don't need a specialist to manage it. If I did either of these two strategies, I wouldn't self-managed. I'm a little time poor. But if I was going to do one of the two, I'd probably go holiday lets because you need to find a really, really, really good HMO property manager because it is a really specialist skill set, and normal letting agents who do a bit of HMO stuff tend not to do a great job. That's obviously not a blanket rule, just pointing that out. I'm sure there's some people listening who operate letting agents who do a great job. But from my experience, the specialists are the ones to tend to do a slightly better job. But they are few and far between. Whereas with a holiday let, you can get a virtual assistant, for example, to run it for you and give them the processes and train them. And if that person ever left or went on to do something else, you've got those systems and processes that you could hire for reasonably quickly and get it replaced again. So just a consideration. That doesn't mean that everybody should now write off option one and look at option two. But for me, that's why I would choose option two if you force my hand. Okay, so next, bit of a different spin. Increase your yield? Well, look at small developments. Well, what do we mean? Well, the term force the yield, and you may hear that used sometimes in property circles, but basically it's maximising the potential yield out of the property you have. An example of that could be turning a house you have, getting planning permission, and turning it into 2 or 3 apartments. So if you break this down further, if you took a house worth 150,000 with, say, a modest return of £600 per month rent, and then you turn that into 3 flats or apartments and turn them into 400 each, well, you've doubled the yield. And possibly overall, the properties individually may be worth more as well. So the pros of this are you end up with single lets at the end as well. So it's still straightforward to manage. You achieve what Rob and I crave, the straightforward, basic, boring nature to property at the end. You get single lets, they're easier to manage, easy to find tenants, and it's a straightforward process moving on from there. As I've already said, you may increase the value as well, which In fact, could be a lot more than the yield you're going to get the increase by if you do it well. So why isn't everyone doing this? Well, first of all, it's not easy to find units that fit the bill and that you'll get planning to do this. So in theory, quite an interesting strategy. In practice, harder to implement. Again, financing comes up. Financing can be challenging to put together if you've not done this before. But even if you're experienced, it's going to be more expensive than normal financing. So you have to bear that in mind. Another thing to remember is if you've not done this before, maybe you've painted your spare bedroom, going in, turning a house into 2 or 3 apartments probably isn't the next step in your journey. Build that experience first. Otherwise, it could end up costing you money. And that's the risk of this one. While the upside is big because you can add possible value and get an increased return, the downsides are bigger as well because if you get it wrong, actually it could cost you money. So experience helps with this. If you've got the skill set, you have a trade or you work with somebody who's got a trade that would benefit this type of conversion, then fantastic. But this is not the type of investment you go into lighthearted. So a really interesting strategy, not for everyone, but for the right person with the right skill sets, could be very attractive.
Yeah, I think so far of the 3, this is probably the one that appeals to me most. And it's not something I'd do on my own because I don't have all the skills, but I do like the fact that you're increasing the yield, increasing the value often as well. And you end up, like you said, Rob, with that nice, boring, easy to manage property at the end of it. So you go through a bit of an adventure, but then you end up with something nice and safe and easy to manage. Now, some people do this very well. I can see why when people are talking about high yield, though, it tends to come up less. Of the 4 that we're going to talk about, this is probably the one that people don't tend to think of so much. And the reason for that, I think, is as well as the fact that you need certain skills, it's less predictable. You can't model it out in the same way as you could with HMOs, for example. So that is small developments. We've got one more for you, and that is what we're calling cheapo houses. So we've just looked at something pretty complicated. Now let's go as simple as you can possibly go, just buying a very cheap house. Because a yield is the ratio between rent and property price. Rents have a floor set effectively, and in many areas that floor is set by housing benefit. So there's a certain minimum amount that you'll know that you'll be able to get in rent for a property. Yet houses can be extremely cheap. So obviously if you've got a floor set on the rent is a certain amount, then the lower you can get your purchase price, the higher the yield is going to be. Now, we looked at the poor chap earlier who bought his £7,000 flat in auction. I actually know someone who bought a house for £7,000. He had a bit of a happier story to this. He bought it in auction, he solved a legal problem with it, and he sold it for over £20,000. So you can get houses ridiculously cheap. For the most part, though, if you don't go ludicrously cheap, but you just go pretty damn cheap, you can end up getting sort of HMO-style yields just by getting these cheap houses and renting them out as single lets, usually, but not necessarily, to the LHA market. So why is this something that you might want to do? Well, it's very, very simple. It's basically just a completely normal buy-to-let strategy, but you're targeting a certain type of property in a certain type of area that you've calculated will give you a much higher yield than you could get elsewhere. So again, just like with HMOs, you can model this out, you can work out how many you need, and you can just go and do it. Really, really easy. What might put you off though? Well, same old story really. So there's management. The management can be challenging. You're dealing with a certain tenant profile that might not be the most straightforward. And if you're dealing with tenants who are receiving benefits, the rules around benefits keep changing. Getting paid isn't always easy. And the other thing that we've seen with some of the other strategies as well is trying to work out what net yield you'll actually end up with. So the headline rate, again, looks great, but you've got to factor in that non-collected rent. Are you actually going to be able to collect the rent for every month of the year? Chances are you might not. You might have tenants who stop paying. You have to evict them. You don't recover all the money. You might also have higher than usual repair costs if they're not looking after the property particularly well. So once again, very simple, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. So we've got 4 different high yielding strategies. And Rob, I think we're seeing a lot of commonalities really between them.
Yeah, it turns out you have to work for money.
Who knew?
So if you want more money, you have to do more work. God, I'm sure you heard your parents tell you that one. But that universal rule applies to property. No matter what you do, you have to put more in terms of skill set, time, whatever it is. You have to do a bit more risk maybe, but you have to put a bit more in to get a bit more out. Now, for some people, If they're highly motivated enough, as we've said, that is more than acceptable. And you can choose one of these 4 paths or others that we've given you and go down that route to get that yield, to get that return, to get that money in your pocket every month so you can do what you want. For others, you might just be in it for the long term like we are. And you know what? A % here or there makes no odds to your life. It's up to you. There's no right or wrong way. But if you are motivated to get extra cash in right now, pick one of these 4 that best suited to you and your skill sets. As we've said, it's not for everyone, but for some people, this will be bang on the money. No pun intended. And you can start changing your life now. And that's the great thing about property. There's not just one way. There are all different approaches, and they can make a huge impact on your life, either short or long term.
Yeah, it is one of my favourite things about property. Chances are that one of these will have sounded pretty good to you, and some of the others will have sounded like your worst nightmare. And for the person sitting next to you, it could be completely the opposite. And that's what makes it so much fun. Chances are there are other methods that we haven't thought of. So are there any other ways to get a high yield? Well, get on over to the Property Hub. Let us know. Carry on the discussion. Go to thepropertyhub.net/forum. And if you've got a high yielding strategy that you're a big fan of, and you don't mind letting a few other people in on it, 20,000 people to be exact, then share that on the forum. And we also, every week, give you the opportunity to voice your opinion of the Property Podcast in the form of an iTunes review. So, Rob, has anyone taken us up on that this week?
Oh, yes, they have. And a huge thank you to the following. First up, Mickeldocus, sounds like a Harry Potter character. A very easy to listen to podcast full of brilliant content and information, engagingly presented by Rob and Rob, who bounce off each other beautifully. Great job. Well, thank you. And also, Lilitsaki says, I listened to the podcast after reading Rob's book. Now, my 40-minute commute, which I used to hate, suddenly became the most enjoyable part of my day. I love the podcast, and it's much more informative than the huge amount of reading material I've gone through. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you both. We will.
Okay, so in a minute, we will be telling you what's coming up next week. But first, we've just got time for a resource of the week. As ever, this is not a property one. It's a very quick and simple one. It's just a small thing that's made my life a lot better over the last few weeks. So I travel a lot and I like to have good sound quality. So Rob and I were chatting about the Sonos system that he's got. We've had that as a resource of the week in the past, and I was getting very jealous because that's not something you can really lug around the world with you. But I went onto Amazon and I got myself a Bluetooth speaker, a little tiny thing called an Anker Soundcore Mini. It's about the size of half a Coke can. It probably weighs about the same as that as well. And the sound quality that you get out of this thing is unbelievable. I was completely blown away by it. You could basically stick it in the corner of the room and use it for a party. I haven't done that. The neighbours wouldn't be too happy, but you basically could. The quality and the volume that you get out of something so tiny and so light is really incredible. So this probably won't be relevant to the majority of people, but if you do travel and you like decent quality audio, for under 20 quid, this could change your life like it changed mine. And it's had nearly 2,000 reviews on Amazon, averaging 5 stars. So I'm clearly not alone there.
Wow, it's more than our podcast. Well, we do like good value, Rob, and that's why we'll be back next week with even more. And next week, I'm actually really looking forward to this, which is probably a reflection of my life, is how to use Rightmove and Zoopla like a pro. We are on Rightmove and Zoopla all the time. In fact, it's not even 8 a.m. yet, and I've actually been on Rightmove already. Yeah, that really does give a reflection into my life. But because we are on Rightmove and Zoopla so much, we've become semi-experts. Yes, you all know how to put a postcode in and search through properties, but there is so much more to it, and so much more you can take advantage of. So next week, we'll be boosting the traffic figures for Rightmove and Zoopla and teaching you how to use it like a pro and taking full advantage of all its features.
Oh yes, that will be a good one. So to tide you over until then, we've got Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday, as always. We've also got our meetups tonight. Get along and enjoy those. And don't forget to get your listener deals in. So go over to thepropertyhub.net/yourdeals, give us the info, and in a few weeks' time, you could be benefiting from our critique. So loads for you to be doing. We'd better leave you to it. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.